I'm George Shultz. I used to be Secretary of State, and before that, Secretary of the Treasury. I've also known Milton Friedman for about 4 decades, and I've benefited greatly from my exposure to him and to his ideas. He's a great economist, a great scholar, and a great idea man. He also has an abundance of common sense and good judgment. The program you're about to see has to do with international trade. The lessons here are the same as for our domestic markets. Open markets and free markets lead to low prices, good quality products, and high wages. As a government official, I used to work hard to keep our markets open, and I had many battles with people who wanted to close them. I didn't always win. The reason is that people fight hard to protect themselves when they find competition from abroad is too tough. Protectionism is a big problem for all of us. We need to say to those who are having trouble competing that you've got to get in there and compete. And if they can't compete, we've got to help them adjust and find new jobs. But in the meantime, from the standpoint of our whole society, we're all so much better off if we keep ourselves open to the competition from international trade, particularly so these days in markets that are becoming increasingly global. Government is essential to our well-being. We need it to protect our security, and we need government to provide stable and orderly and lawful conditions in which our society can operate. But practically all governments go too far and intrude themselves much too much in economic and business affairs. It seems an almost irresistible temptation. So let's remember what that great humorist Will Rogers used to say. Just be thankful you're not getting all the government you're paying for. But then it would be better if we got less and also paid less.
Human and political freedom has never existed and cannot exist without a large measure of economic freedom.
Freedom is making choices. What's best for me? What do I want to do? We all want to be free to choose.
No government official is telling these people what to do.
Parental control, parents choosing the teacher, parents monitoring the schooling.
Free to live your own life, pursue your own goals, chase your own rainbow, without the government breathing down on your neck or standing on your shoes.
Most of us would choose prosperity if we could, but what's the best road to that goal?
Free trade set off a process that revolutionized Japan and the lives of its people.
The Pilgrims tried a form of socialism over 300 years ago. Unfortunately for their fair-minded plans, they prospered only after they were allowed to keep for themselves all the food they grew.
Who says economic institutions don't matter?
We may dream of a perfect world, but we all know that's not possible.
Hong Kong is very far from utopia. Life is unfair. There's nothing fair about one man being born blind and another man being born with sight. I do not know any exception to the proposition that if you compare like with like, the freer the system, the better off the ordinary poor people have been.
Dr. Friedman has spent a lifetime studying freedom and prosperity. To him, the lessons of history are clear. People are better off making their own choices, better off not relying on government. Free to choose is a survival kit for you and for liberty.
It's harvest time, and Japanese farmers gather their crops for the rice market in Kyoto. Of course, they'll try to get as much for it as possible, and the buyers will try to buy it as cheaply as possible. That's how markets are supposed to work. That's what Adam Smith, the Scotsman who turned economics into a modern science, observed 200 years ago. He observed something else, too.
In every country, It is always and must be in the interest of the great body of people to buy whatever they want of those who sell it cheapest. The proposition is so very manifest that it seems ridiculous to take any pains to prove it. Nor could it ever have been called in question had not the interested sophistry of merchants and manufacturers confounded the common sense of mankind. Their interest is, in this respect, directly opposite to that of the great body of people.
Adam Smith's flash of genius was to see how prices that emerged in the market, the prices of goods, the wages of labor, and the cost of transport, could coordinate the activities of millions of independent people, strangers to one another, without anybody telling them what to do. His key idea was that self-interest could produce an orderly society benefiting everybody. It was as though there were an invisible hand at work.
The invisible hand is a phrase that was introduced by Adam Smith in his great book, The Wealth of Nations, in which he talked about the way in which individuals who intended only to pursue their own interests were led by an invisible hand to promote the public welfare, which was no part of their intention. He was talking about the economic market, about the market in which people buy and sell. And he was pointing out that in order for a butcher or a baker or a candlestick maker to make an income, he had to produce something that somebody wanted to buy. And therefore, in the process of promoting his own interests and looking to his own profit, he ended up serving the interests of his customers.
When Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, Britain was still largely a rural and placid place. But the Industrial Revolution was already getting started, and standards of life were beginning to rise. One obstacle was that trade with other nations was still tightly controlled. Merchants in the home market had persuaded the government of the day to impose heavy duties and taxes on all foreign imports in order to ensure themselves a protected market. One of the results was to turn Britain into a nation of lawbreakers. Smuggling was a national pastime. Brandy, wines, tobacco, anything with a heavy customs duty on it. For years, the revenue men fought a losing battle along the shores and inlets of the British Isles. In 1846, after years of argument and partial success, the followers of Adam Smith finally persuaded the British Parliament to remove all duties on goods imported from abroad. Britain embarked on complete free trade, giving a further push to the rising standard of life. What happened in Britain as a consequence of releasing the tremendous force of self-interest had the unintended effect of benefiting millions of people all over the world. And by 1851, the evidence was proudly on show at the great Crystal Palace exhibition. Free trade enabled Britain to become the workplace of the world. But was it all an accident? I don't think it was. Consider what happened in 1868 on the other side of the world, in Japan. For the preceding 300 years, the Japanese had lived in almost complete isolation. They had discouraged visitors from other nations, especially from the West. The result was that by the standards of the West, Japan was backward. It was a feudal society with lords and serfs, and woe betide anyone who tried to change the order of things. Women were